In the previous video, I constructed the base of the forward superstructure and prepared it for the installation of the photo-etch vents. That is what I'm going to be doing in this video. In total, there are 6 vents to be installed, 3 on each side of the superstructure. In the previous video, I had cut out these holes to make them roughly the size of the vents. They're slightly smaller than the size of the vents, which makes sense because obviously the vent needs to sit over it and not fall through. But I've tried to make it almost perfectly fit the border of the photo-etch vent. This can be a bit risky because if you cut too deep, then you'll have a gap outside of the frame and you'll then need to fill that somehow. To install the vents, I apply extra thick super glue to the border of the frame and then I place it over the hole. Once tacked in place, I then reinforce the perimeter of the vent using extra thin super glue. When installing the vents, I take care to ensure that they are horizontal. If they are even slightly out of alignment, they will look odd. When looking through the vents at an angle, or looking in the corners in particular, you can see a bit of plastic on the other side of the vent. That is only because at this point, this area of the ship is not enclosed. Once this area of the ship is enclosed and it's dark on the interior, you won't be able to see that so visibly, especially if you paint that inner portion of the wall in black. Although at this point there is a little bit of plastic visible, it doesn't concern me. While working with plastic, I'm also going to install 3 doors. I'm not going to install the doors that go on the larger bulkheads onto the forecastle deck. I'm going to install the 3 doors at the aft of the structure that open up onto the shelter deck. To fold these doors, I use my Photo-etch folding tool. The doors that come with this FlyHawk kit in particular don't really want to fold perfectly in half. And while normally it's sufficient to fold doors with tweezers, in this case, to get the door to align properly with the frame, I need to use the Photo-etch folding tool. They're not the best Photo-etch doors that I've worked with, but they are considerably better than the plastic doors that were molded onto the part, so it's well worth going through the trouble of replacing them. To glue down the doors, I apply a drop of extra thick super glue to the area in which I want to install the door, and then I place the door on top of the drop of super glue. Now that all the photo-etch is on, well, not all of it, all of the photo-etch that I'm going to be installing in this video at least, there are at least 2 more hatches that need to be installed in this area of the superstructure, and of course that platform that sticks out above those vents at the top. But other than that, all the photo-etch has been installed. I now want to cover this area of the ship with Mr. Surfacer to help fill defects that are there, and then to also reveal the larger defects that will then require further work to correct. Painting, whether it be with normal paint or with Mr. Surfacer, always has a tendency to reveal defects. So while a part can look perfectly fine unpainted, as soon as you put that layer of paint on it, it could look terrible. And in this case, well, I won't say it's terrible, but it wasn't good enough. So after applying this around on Mr. Surfacer, I then go through the process of correcting the defects, which really comes in the form of just removing excess superglue filler that I left on the model. And that's really just a matter of sanding it down a little bit more with 400 grit sandpaper. After doing that a few times, I'm happy with the finish. I move on to a bit of a strange thing to do for this step of building the model, and that's to actually spray on the color coat. And the reason that I'm doing it now is because of this inner section. As soon as I put on the platform above these bulkheads or install it on the ship, I'm not going to be able to easily spray into this area of the ship. So while it's all open, I'm going to spray the color coat, focusing on this central portion. But what I did do was load up way too much paint, and I thought, well, I have it in the gun, I need to use it. Once you put paint into the airbrush, it's very difficult to get it back into the bottle. So I might as well just spray it out onto this part and see how it looks when fully painted in its final color. After giving the paint a bit of time to dry, I can then glue the platform onto the bulkheads. Since everything had been pre-fitted and is properly aligned, the parts fit together very well. All I need to do is place the platform onto the bulkheads and then apply extra thin plastic cement to the contact area to bend them together. But as you know, I like to make things difficult for myself, so this very simple task I managed to mess up. And I did that by, like an idiot, putting my thumb on the seam line between these 2 components, which meant the glue seeped through the seam line, got to my finger, then capillary reaction pulled it out of the joint and onto the side of the bulkhead. Fortunately, a side effect of making stupid mistakes like this is that you learn how to fix stupid mistakes like this. In this case, if you do this and it looks terrible, you think you've ruined your model, don't worry. Easy fix. All you need to do is get some lacquer thinner, rub that on the affected area to dissolve that excess glue. Effectively, you're just spreading it out over a very large area and then letting the solvent evaporate off. That will probably be sufficient. In addition to that, if you just want to be very certain, is you can use your sandpaper again to just blend it off a little bit better, and then respray the area. All is done. This costs you some time, but it's ultimately very harmless. It will, of course, remove all the paint, but paint's easy to replace, especially at this stage. So I do all of that and then repaint this area of the superstructure. So all that excess XF53 that I put on previously gets covered by Mr. Surfacer. Doesn't really matter. But while spraying on this additional Mr. Surfacer to this balustrade for the platform, I take a closer look at the area where those connection points to the sprue were, and they look terrible, so that needs to be sorted out. The trick that I'm going to use to smooth off that surface, because it's very difficult to sand in such a small area, is to use extra thin super glue and effectively create a little puddle in that area, and then let the puddle dry. That will create a smooth surface, or a considerably smoother surface than what it was before. It does have a tendency to thin a bit when it dries off. After letting that glue dry off, I then spray it in another layer of Mr. Surfacer to see how it looks, and it does look considerably better. This is where I'm going to end this video. In the next video, I'll work on removing outcroppings from parts A8 and A10. If you would like to support this channel or see how this ship looks when it is completed, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.